So thank you guys for joining me for this session. This is PowerApps versus InfoPath, the battle between the up-and-comer and the heavyweight champion of the world, which is InfoPath. If you, like me, you loved InfoPath, and it's still around, but it's going to kind of be taken over, and it's being gradually overtaken by PowerApps, which is awesome. But I'm going to show you the difference between the two and when to use each in this session. So I think you guys were, well, all of you were in my session last time, except for, well, I think he's coming back. So my name's Nakia Carter. I'm a Microsoft strategist, solutions developer, and trainer. My specialties are in Office 365, SharePoint, and related, and there's some of my street cred there on this slide. I'm just going to move on. If you want to reach out to me, there is some of my contact information here on this slide, and you can feel free to reach out. Now, before we begin, make sure you thank the sponsors, you thank the hosts, but I also want to thank all of you guys for attending this conference today. Don't forget about your user groups and other communities that are out there on the web, as well as SharePoint conferences and other conferences that will help you continue on your learning journey. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me right now during the session. Don't be afraid to interrupt me, because I will be okay. I want you to get your question out as soon as you think of it. I have to give a disclaimer for this class as well. Again, that don't hit me, because this is cloud technology that I am going to be talking about. InfoPath is not necessarily cloud technology, but it gets injected into the cloud atmosphere as well as on-prem. But PowerApps is definitely cloud. So whenever they make a change, I might end up fumbling around for a second. There may be some consistency between my slides, and please forgive me if they are. This is the beginning step for your 1,000-mile journey, but hopefully it will help you start that journey. So let's get ready to rumble. So first of all, we're going to talk about InfoPath. Now, this course assumes that you know more about InfoPath and PowerApps as far as possible development. Now, if you don't, I will show you some, but I'm not going to get down into the weeds about the development of InfoPath or PowerApps. I do include some links to 2 of my sessions that I did for InfoPath development. So if you really need to brush up on that, I do have some links for that at the end of this deck that you'll have the ability to get to. So InfoPath, it's a tear because I love InfoPath to death, but InfoPath is going to go at some point. It's been around for a little bit. So it's been around since 2003 Office. That was the year it was actually released, was in 2003. In Office Professional. Now, first you didn't have the ability to use filler. Filler didn't come into play until I think 2010, or it might have been 2007, one or the other one. Where a person didn't have to have InfoPath on their computer if they had an InfoPath form that was standalone, as opposed to one that was like injected into SharePoint, and that way they used it through the browser. If InfoPath wasn't being used through the browser, they had to use it through Designer, and Designer cost money because Designer only came in Pro or Pro Enterprise. Or Pro Plus or Ultimate, if it came in 2007, I can't remember now. But once filler came around, that was available in the baseline of Office, and people were able to use it that weren't developing it. So some of the features, you have the ability to do rules, data validation, formatting, custom conditional formatting, blah, 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 SharePoint integration, customized user roles, all inside of InfoPath. For those ActiveX Controls, let me go back. For those ActiveX Controls, they're similar to the controls that you experience for your SharePoint lists and libraries. The list box, the radio buttons, the text boxes, But they also had buttons. They also had calculated values, which are similar to calculated columns, and the repeating fields. And you also have the ability to connect to external data sources. So it could be used to work by itself. It didn't have to connect to anything. It could just stand on itself, on its own, possibly be in a server somewhere where people go to it, they click on it, they fill it out, and it possibly saves itself in some other location in the server. So it didn't have to be connected to anything, but it could be connected to a lot of different things. And most of those things are Microsoft related. So Access, Excel, Word, but you could also connect to things like other business systems and XML schema. And of course the SharePoint, which most people in this room anyway know how to do, or know about at least. So how's it used in SharePoint? A lot of people just use it to make pretty forms. Make the form not look SharePointy. SharePointy, that's an actual term. It's probably in Webster now. But a lot of people also use it to make more functional forms because those list forms are not very dynamic. To do digital signatures, to build workflow in or around it. And yes, I did say workflow in it because workflow is just conditions and actions, right? You can do that in in InfoPath. You can build a workflow directly in it. There's certain things that it won't do, like being able to change permissions. You have to do an outside workflow for that. But a lot of the stuff like approval process, it's just notifications, conditions, and actions. That's it. You can do that directly in InfoPath. You can build dashboards, reports, and content types, which was one of my favorite things to do. Because most people, they're like, hey, that form looks cool. I want it in my place. And you're like, really? Now I got to push it out to your place too? And then I got to maintain? No, you just make it a content type. And then whenever changes get made, everybody gets those changes. So I loved InfoPath with content types. The form types in SharePoint that InfoPath can take over are the list forms, but they can also be its own template as a form library form. So the list forms are very simple, just like the SharePoint list, very simple. They don't have things like repeating sections, repeating fields, repeating tables. None of those can be done in your list form. You have to go up to a form library form, which is in itself like a document, and they go into the SharePoint library called the form library. And that one had more functionality than the list form. PowerApps, which is the up-and-comer. So PowerApps is something that Microsoft came out with fairly recently. It basically came out in late 2015. Public preview was in early to mid 2016. But now it's like everybody's talking about PowerApps. It's like, PowerApps, yeah, it's the new thing that's going to replace InfoPath. Well, kind of. Not so fast, but mostly it's getting there. So it has a lot of the features that InfoPath has. But note, there's no XPath expressions and functions. There may be the customized user roles that just came out not too long ago, but I haven't been able to do the research on that yet, so that's possibly still a cross out for that. But all the rest of the features are everything that PowerApps can do. Now the code behind, I should kind of preface that, it's not really code behind, it's code in instead of behind the form. It's a little bit different in the way that it looks, but it's still code injection into the form can be done. How can it be used in SharePoint? Same thing, except for content types. Can't create content types, which kind of sucks because there's always a form that somebody wants in this department and they want in this department and they want in this department if you work for a large organization. You're gonna have to maintain each one of those things. That sucks. But hopefully that won't suck for long. So the options inside of SharePoint for PowerApps. So like SharePoint InfoPath forms, there's the list forms and there's the form library forms. They have the SharePoint customized forms, which is like the list form, and the InfoPath list form. And then they have the standalone app. which is not really like the SharePoint form library forms. They're kind of standalone, as in they're standing all the way outside of SharePoint. But you can kind of use a web part to bring them into SharePoint. And you can use them on mobile as well. Now the customized ones, I should go through this. The customized ones are not found in the PowerApps gallery. So if you ever went straight to PowerApps and you signed in, if you've ever seen that, and I'll show you that in a minute, you won't see any of your SharePoint list apps listed. You have to actually go to the SharePoint list and hit the Customize List button, and then you'll see that Power App. So it only works in lists, not in libraries. And you can embed it in a page. So that web part that Microsoft was like, we have a PowerApps web part. Yay, you can use it. We have the new PowerApps in Teams. You could use that. It don't work with this. You got to use a Canvas app, which kind of sucks too. Kind of those things they don't tell you until you get in it and you're like, wait a minute, that don't work. You also can't move it between sites and environments. Now there's supposed to be an export, and some people have gotten it to work. I have not yet. Did you get it to work?
Yeah.
Cool. Because I'm like, maybe something wrong with me or something, because I ain't get it to work.
Initially, we don't have that feature initially, but they added that feature, export and import. So once you export it, it will create a zip file. Zip file text, so we can import. But,
okay.
Unfortunately, the connectors is the problem. So once you import it, then you need to change the connectors.
Yeah, mine just blew up. When I exported it and I tried to import it, it just was like, no, no, I'm not going to. But I know a few of my friends have gotten it to work, and I'm glad you've gotten it to work. So maybe it's just me, or it might have been my environment, because you know cloud. Everybody's cloud is might have a little bit of different sauce in it. So could have been my cloud too. I'll go back and check it. The standalone apps, they appear in the PowerApps gallery, and you can also use them on mobile. So if you get the PowerApps mobile app, you can actually sign in to that environment and you would see all of your PowerApps that were for mobile. They work in lists and libraries, but only because, they work for lists and libraries, I should say, but only because they can pull the data from that list or library into it. Not that they're in the library or the list where you hit the new button and then the form shows up. That's not what this means. Okay. You can embed it in a SharePoint page, and you can use it anywhere, more anywhere than the customized list. Because the customized list is connected to the list. And it's not like InfoPath where you could export the list and then import it to a different place. It's like, yeah, I'm just going to go back to the regular list, and you got to rebuild the whole thing. So you can't cheat like that either. All right, so live demo. This is a link from SharePoint Saturday Baltimore. I have another one where I did it did the same session for SharePoint Saturday, maybe Reston, I think. Both of them are a little slightly different. Baltimore, I got further than I did in Reston because there were a lot more questions, and in Reston I had a longer session too, I think. So I'll have all the links plus the link for today on this slide too. So let's go and let's do the demo part. First of all, we're going to look at the InfoPath. So we're going to look at this InfoPath list first. Now basically this is just a SharePoint list. Where is my mouse? Okay. This is just a SharePoint list that I've customized with the InfoPath form so that when I click on new, instead of seeing the regular list form that I would normally see for SharePoint lists, I see a form that looks prettier. But this form doesn't just look prettier, it actually has in the phone and the email, I actually have a validation rule that makes me have to put in a phone number in the right, and an email address in the right format, or it won't save it. Or maybe I didn't put that there, crap. Hopefully I put that rule in there or I'm going to get proved wrong just because I forgot to put the rule in there. Let me go ahead and save it. It looks like I didn't put the rule in there. That's crappy. Well, what would happen is because I have a validation rule, it would have red dots going around the box and it wouldn't let me save it. And it would pop up a message that says, no, you're supposed to do it in whatever format. Because I normally put in my, the little pop-up and I say explicitly the way that you're supposed to do it. That way the person, they're just not like, okay, so what am I supposed to do? You gave me an error, but I don't know what to do. I give them a good message so that they know what to do. Now the list form, the way that I created it is I went through InfoPath, which I'm going to show you in a minute. You can also go through, you can also go through the list itself, which actually is the way I did this list form. I normally go through the list, but you can go through InfoPath and create the form off of the list once the list is created. In order to get to the InfoPath stuff though, I have to go to Classic. I can't be in Modern. Modern is only for Flow and PowerApps. If I want to get to InfoPath, crap, come on, mouse stuff. I gotta go return to Classic SharePoint and then go up to the List tab. And there's my Customize and InfoPath button, which would open up InfoPath for my desktop. But like I said, you can go the opposite way. I just usually build my list first, and then I customize it from there instead of going the other way. Now that's different than when I go and use my form library form. My form library form, I normally start in InfoPath. So let's go look at InfoPath. Let's go open up one. Oh, it's on my other screen. Oh, actually, I can do that. Okay. So here's your SharePoint list. So like I said, you could go the opposite way, but I like building my list first and then pushing it to InfoPath. But for the form library form, you don't have a choice. You got to go to InfoPath. You got to click on this and then hit design. Now when you hit design, you get a basic form that looks like this, basic template. And you can do all of your changes from there. Now if you're used to InfoPath or any Office thing, you're used to all the stuff that you get for like customizing text and highlights and different font types and search, like the different tables. Well, this might be a little bit weird to you, but you still know about the insert tab and the different things you can insert, or insert in custom tables or hyperlinks or pictures and blah, blah, blah. Now, some of these things are a little bit different, like on the home page, on the home tab, the controls. These controls will differ if you're in a list form. If you're in a list form, you don't get any of this right here. And some of these things are not there either. Okay, you get all this stuff up at the top, but these are definitely not here. Normally, when I use InfoPath, I create a form library form. I don't care what the person said. They could say, oh, we're never going to need a repeating table, because you know what they're going to need next week? A repeating table. And they're going to be like, oh, yeah, you know, you probably should have thought about that, because, you know, they blame you, like, you know. Or they're just like, I'm sorry. And you're just like, the pain right now, the pain, and I want to transfer the pain to your neck. But you can't do that because they're your customer, right? You just got to suck it up and get her done. So to save myself the pain, I just always make a form library form so it has all the functionality. So if they go back and they change their mind, all I got to do is make changes to the form and I don't have to worry about it. Another thing that's different is the rules. being able to manage your rules, so being able to stick rules here and manage them. The page design, that's another thing that you're probably used to outside of Office, but being able to connect to data, the different submit options, being able to do roles on loading the form. Like I always name my form something when on load, and then I have it conditional so that if it's already named, it doesn't get renamed something else. That way when it gets pushed out to the place that it's gonna stay, it already has a name. The rule inspector helps you inspect the rules that you have in your form, because you could have a gazillion of those things, and having a rule inspector there can just help with that, help minimize the pain somewhat. Under File, this is where you can publish your form. So once your form is developed, you will publish it here. Now in InfoPath 2010, they made it a bit easier. Once you publish the form, you could just use this quick publish button, which is probably not up here right now. It's grayed out. And you could just click on that and it would quickly publish your form right back to the same spot that it was already in, without you having to go through all the steps and settings and everything all over again. One of the problems with 2007 InfoPath was that if you didn't go through all those steps correctly, especially when you got down to the columns part, it would make whole new columns, which means you had data, 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 possibly even data, 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 and they can't merge together. So then you're basically just screwed. You got to start all over, because now you got 3 columns with data in them that, you know how users are. They're just like, everything's gone to hell. And you're like, it's nearly not that bad. It's really not. Another thing that I want you to know about this, besides the publish, which I'm not going to go through all the steps right now, just note that when you publish your form library forms, you don't have to create the form library first. You can have InfoPath create the form library for you. So you could create the form, and then you could tell InfoPath during one of those steps, there's a setting for you to say, just create the form library for me. Or if you already have a form library, you could publish it into that form library. Or you could choose to make the InfoPath form a content type, which is what I normally do. That way, if somebody else wants the form and they're in the same organization, I can just push it to them through the content type setting inside of the library. And whenever I make a change to the form, they automatically get the change. But one thing I want to tell you about is this account. Now, I said earlier in my previous session about how InfoPath is not changing anymore. And it's not going to be available past 2026. Microsoft added another 3 years because SharePoint 2019 came out and they gave a promise that they would keep supporting it for a certain amount of time. They had to bring out 2019, and each SharePoint has 3 windows of support, or 3 years of support time, so they had to extend that window. So when they did it, they're like, okay, same InfoPath, but you got 3 more years now. Don't know what's going to happen in Office 365 though. They could just cut it off at any time. But I doubt they're going to cut it off at any time, because there are way too many InfoPath forms out there in the government space, and the government will kill them. Right? Government will murder Microsoft if they do that. So they got to make sure that there's going to be some kind of path out as well. So that's another thing. I wouldn't worry too deeply about it. One of the things though with InfoPath is you need to make sure, if you're going to use it in Office 365, that you go to the Account tab and you connect to your Office 365 service. So you notice I have all of these accounts right here, and some of them are not really connected. You go to Add a Service, you go to Storage, you go to Office 365 SharePoint, which is confusing as crap, but that's the one you go to, okay? When you log in, then it will give you the ability to reach your sites and your OneDrive for that Office 365 tenant. You have to do that in order for that form to get pushed into your Office 365 tenant. If not, it's going to hit a wall and it's not going to go anywhere. Another thing to be aware of is if you have MFA, And it took me a long time to figure this out. And I wrote an article on it, and I think I have it in the end of these slides, a link to it. If I don't, I'll make sure I add it. If you have MFA, for PowerApps or for InfoPath, there's going to have to be a little certain thing that you're going to have to do in order to make your MFA work. If not, it's just going to hit a wall and just going to stop. And it's not even going to tell you. InfoPath won't tell you. It'll just be like, you can't get in. Sorry. Okay. So I'll include those write-ups if they're not already included. But that's something that you need to know about. So when you publish this form, which isn't actually the form that I'm going to publish, I already published another form that is right here on my other screen. It's just a short form called Team Roster. Okay. It just has a repeating section right here. It has a text box right here that has a rule on it that will take the project name and put it up there. So it's real simple. A people picker. Really simple. Once you publish the form, I'm in my form library right now. Notice how this looks weird. Like it just looks like a document, right? Or it looks weirder than the list form did. The list form was just data. It was just a row of data. Because remember, the InfoPath list form is just taking the place of the SharePoint form. It adds a little bit more functionality, but it's just taking the place of it. The form library form is an actual document in itself. But when you click on a new, you get your little form right here, as opposed to Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and OneNote. So that is different. You click on it, and it brings up the form. And I got my stuff that I can do to it, like being able to change the project name and put the project lead in there and inserting team members or taking them away. So I have the different controls that I can do here. And because this is a form library form, I don't like having the ribbon up here. I don't like that save button. I make my own submit button with its own special rules so that they can save in certain times, or save but not really submit it to like a workflow type situation, or the submit would be different. So I make my own custom buttons. Now if we look at this form that I already created, actually it didn't show so I guess I didn't connect that part. I did in my other demo. That's the problem with sometimes when you move demos, you forget to connect certain things together, and I forgot that part. But you get the point. Here is the project name, project lead, the team members, and I chose for this InfoPath form to not only have the name, which shows up here in the name field, but I'm pushing out one of the columns or one of the fields as a column into the library. It's called a promoted field, and I'm just promoting it to the library. So that's the difference between the InfoPath library and lists. Any questions there? All right, let me just make sure I'm hitting everything. Let's go into my notes because now we're going to go to PowerApps. All right, so this PowerApps list is just showing a simple customized form. Basically, it's a PowerApps list form, like the InfoPath list form. So when I click on new, because this is modern, it's not going to take up, well, it's taking up the page because you can't really see. There we go. It kind of comes as a slide out, just like the list forms, the SharePoint list form slides out. It slides out too, but notice it has its own specialness, like it has a logo up here. It looks different than the other form. I can't remember if I put validation rules in here, but you can. And how you customize it is you can go under PowerApps and hit Customize Form. Now that's different than this Create an App. I can't tell you how many times this thing has screwed me up. Why they have create an app there in the SharePoint list is just like, what? Because you expect it to become part of the list, right? It becomes one of those Canvas apps. So then you don't see it when you click the new button. It's weird. Or at least this one should be the first one, right? Yeah, you would think, but you know, whatever. So just remember, it's customized forms. If you want to customize the SharePoint's list form, then you got to hit customize forms. Now, hopefully my MFA doesn't bark at me. I think I already MFA'd in here. All right, it didn't. Cool. All right, so it's going to take me straight to the form. Now it gives me a few things to start off with, like, do I want to add and remove some fields, learn about customizing, but I just always skip all that. The connection to the InfoPath, the connection of PowerApps to the SharePoint list is just like the connection of InfoPath as a list form to the SharePoint list. The connection is automatically there because you're initiating it to be so. It's different than when we go and look at one of these PowerApps the Canvas apps that we're going to look at in a minute, okay? But I'm going to show you some of the similarities that you'll see. And then I'll come back and talk about the data source a little bit more. Whoops, wrong thing. Oh, I'm already on the correct. I'm always used to the big fat ribbon, so I always forget that I'm already on the ribbon right here on home. Anyway, so home, you have some things that make sense, like themes. That makes sense, you know, as far as office. Your fonts and stuff, but of course I got to click on something to get some fonts to be able to be available, sizes, the different font types, colors, fill colors, border, stuff like that. Stuff is that's already familiar to you because of Office. Now when you get to insert, this will be familiar to you because of InfoPath more than because of any other Office thing, except for being able to insert a picture. But like labels, which are these things right here, just a name, just a place for you to put in words. Buttons, which I don't have any on here. Text controls. Other controls, like your radio buttons, your check boxes, things that you would find in InfoPath. The galleries is where it gets a little bit like, okay, but think about it that like the template that we saw in InfoPath, when I clicked on that first insert and it showed, notice it was like a little bit further down on the ribbon and it showed a bunch of different ways that the form could look structurally. This is the same thing. I can have it show up with things vertically, horizontally, flexible, height. This doesn't make as much sense until we get to the Canvas app, because with the Canvas app or with the mobile app, one of the screens that you look at is to view all the items, right? So seeing all the items in a vertical format like this or horizontal format like this, to view all the data for each item makes more sense than it does here, because all we're doing is editing the edit form and the view form, but not the view all items form. You guys get that? Is everybody good with that? Okay. You also have your data table, your forms, so there's the edit and display. Again, that's the edit of one item or the display of one item, which I said view instead of display, but it's the same thing. Media is where if you wanted to add a picture, then it would be this image one, not this add a picture. This add a picture one does some weird stuff. I really don't even know what it does really yet, because I was just like, I don't even need this thing. Camera controls, the barcode scanner, things like that. There's some charts in here and icons. Now the view, this is where you can start to see things like the data source. So if I click on it, it opens up another panel right here. media, collections, these things I'm not going to really get into because we could get really deep, really, really deep, really, really fast in this. We're going to kind of stay on the surface, okay? But let's talk about the data source. So if I open the data source, notice that the data source is already there. I did not have to add it. It was already there because I said I wanted to create a Power App that was based on this list. So this data source is named PowerApps List because that was the name of the SharePoint list that I had, if you recall. I can add other data sources. So say, for example, I wanted to add a data source for LinkedIn, or one of my personal favorites is this one right here, Outlook. If I wanted to add a workflow and that workflow had notification, this is how I would add the notification in. Catch 22 here. When a person first uses your form, it's not like InfoPath. InfoPath would just automatically fire off emails all day. This one, they have to actually sign in and give permission for this Power App to access their email. That can be confusing to your users the first time. They'll be like, what the hell is this? Cancel. I'm not doing that. You got to explain to them. You have to accept it or you won't get notifications. Don't cry to me if you don't get notifications because you didn't accept it. So you got to make sure they know that because it's not very obvious. This connection is not the same as a connection in this regard as InfoPath. InfoPath is a little bit more tied into SharePoint in this regard. This one is kind of a separate go point at Outlook type thing. So it has to get permission from that specific person's Outlook the first time in order for them to use it. Okay? Everything else will run, they just won't get any emails. Okay? Is everybody good with that? Even if they're a person in the chain, that's another thing I almost forgot to mention. Even if they're a person that's supposed to get notified, if they didn't go to this Power Apps form and say to the form, you can use my email, when it comes time for them in the chain to get notified, they won't get the email. Yeah. Yay. I love catch 22s, don't you? Yeah. So that's one of those things you want to be aware about, okay? But you can add some pretty cool outside things, outside of SharePoint things, into your SharePoint list form. And that's one of those things that makes it a bit cooler than InfoPath. Just a smidge, just a little bit. I still love InfoPath too much to give up the ghost all the way. Your logos, your labels, your fields, whenever you click on any of these, you have these things called a card over here that changes. So you might have different properties. The rules I'm gonna get to in a second, or different advanced properties that you can access based on what type of thing it is that you just clicked on. So sometimes I've done this to myself. I meant to click on the field and I clicked on this card that contains the field and the label. And then I was like, where is all the stuff that I'm looking for? So just make sure that you clicked on the right thing in order to get like the data card value, which is this field, which also comes in different parts. So let me just kind of go over here, because this part is where it's going to get really, really confusing. And I'm going to try my best to explain it in a way that hopefully you understand. Yes?
Do you follow any naming conventions for the data cards?
Oh yeah, I normally do. And I normally do that for InfoPath too. The naming convention I use in InfoPath is, if I just go back to, I name it based on what it is. So like this first part is a group, like similar to a data card, but it's a grouping. And the group has certain things in it, like a drop down. So I have DRP in front of it. Text, I have TXT. The people picker is different. You can only name the outside thing. You can't really name the inside things without breaking stuff. Repeating table, things like that. When it comes to PowerApps though, I tend to leave like data card 1 or whatever there, but I give the name in front of whatever the name of the field is in front of the data card name. And then when it comes to the values right here, I sometimes come back in here and name the value too. That way when I'm making changes up here, because your code for different things will show up in this function box, kind of similar to Excel. When I'm making changes to the code for like, I'm on this field, but I want this field, once it's filled in, to do something to this other field. If I don't know what the name of that field is, then I gotta look over here and try to figure out what it is. I just try to put the name in front of it. But it can be such a pain for PowerApps. It's not as easy as it was for, at least to me, it's not as easy InfoPath because it's got so many pieces to it, and it just can be time consuming. So a lot of times I'll just skip it unless I really need it for something else. Like if I'm going to create those types of rules or functions on it, then I'll name it so I have some easier access. Other than that, I'm just like, I'll just name the data cards. Now these data cards, it's kind of similar to the group in InfoPath. In the grouping, you could put things like radio buttons or whatever. You can't put things directly on the canvas. So this whole thing right here comes from the SharePoint form. So it's it's the data source to SharePoint, bringing these things in for me to manipulate or add to or remove if I don't like them. You guys get that? So all of this stuff came directly from SharePoint without me having to do anything. I just said customize the form, and it popped up with this stuff here, in here, because this is from and connected to the data source. But this full canvas has more capability than that. So I added a logo by just moving the form down. I just adjusted the form like this. I put a logo up there and I put a label up there. But if I wanted to put any more data, I have to put a card up there. It's not going to let me do anything. Or form, actually. I'm going to have to put a form up there. Now these cards, so I have my form, I have my cards. These cards represent pieces of data that are coming out of SharePoint for right now, or it could just be pieces of data that might be coming from any other data source. But each of these cards has different things to it. So you have the name of the card itself. You have the star visible, which is that asterisk. So if you ever want the star to show up, this is what you have to mess with. Or change the color of it, this is what you mess with, the star visible. The error message would be the little error message that will show up under the field or in that data card at the bottom. So if you needed to manipulate the error message for some reason, this is what you would mess with. The data card value, that's the value of what's going to show up in so this is the title. Okay. This is the title data card. The data card value, let me just do it that way, is the field itself. So it's the value of the field. So you guys get that? This is the title, which is the employee name, which is what I renamed it to, the label to.
It's like an example.
But it's
actually. It's like an example, what you expect to see.
Well, it's one of the actual lines of data. So it's actually one of the lines that came from. Form. Yeah.
Display form. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I don't have it still up here. Let me try duplicating the tab and then go back to SharePoint so you can see. Or not. It just took me to the studio. Lovely. Just go this way. Okay. So see, Joe Smith is the first one. So if you didn't have any data in there, it wouldn't show any data. But I have data in there, so it's showing me the first one. Maybe I should go to phone number. That would be easier to look at. Huh? You'd have to put a function up in here, which we haven't gotten to that part yet. And hopefully we get to that part in a minute. But basically the function would go up. You would click on the field itself, which is the data card value. And you'd put a function up here in a specific spot. Where is this? default. You might do it on change or on select. If it's a validation though, you might put in default actually. It's a validation. On change and on select is what I normally use for like, so it's like a condition and then you do an action based on the field changing or somebody selecting the field. So if you're doing a data validation, it should go in default. That's another thing. There's like parts to each part. So it's like parts to the form, then parts in those parts of the form, then parts to each of those parts. So you see how it can get really confusing really fast? It's not like InfoPath. InfoPath, I just think it's so much easier, but probably because I spent 8 years or 9 years in that field. This one can get really complicated really fast, but I'm still kind of grudgingly loving it as well. Okay, so I'm in the phone data card, which is data card 1, and this is another thing that really pisses me off about PowerApps. So I'm gonna tell you this little side note in a second though. Let me finish with the form. I named it phone in front of data card 1 so that I could understand that that was for the phone. The data card value is the actual field for the phone, where the data would go into. The label, which would be data card key, is the label. Okay? So the label is the key, the value is the actual field. Okay? So you could do stuff to each one of these things, and each one of those data, the data key card key, the data card value, the error message, the visible, the star visible, they all have pieces to it, like padding, role, size, text, fill. They all have pieces that you can manipulate for each one of those things as well. What I normally do is I go through, and this is a pain in the butt the first time, because there's no way to just say select all and just make them all the same thing. I normally go through each one of these labels, and for the first label, I make the size of the font a certain size, a certain kind of font, certain heaviness, like if it's bold or not, and if it's a certain color. Then I take every other label, and under the text, well, not under text, sorry, not under text, under size, and which I think I just passed, size and bold. I forget what the bold is called, but instead of having the size like this right here, I'd actually refer to this label and say so this label is called title. I said data card key 1 dot size. So I make the size of each one of these data key cards the same to the first one. So all I have to do is change the first one. Do you understand what I'm saying? Kind of running out of time, so I'm not going to show you, but all you guys are shaking your head yes, so I'm hoping you understand for real. If not, I did do that on one of my other videos, okay? I had more time to do it on the other video. I know all of this is like really confusing. I'm just going to pause for 1 second and ask, do you have any questions? No? Okay. Now, I said I was going to say something about a catch-22, another catch-22 here. Oh, when you change around the data source or you add new cards or something like that, sometimes these numbers get all mixed up, which is a real pain in the butt. Notice how this one says data card 1 and this one says data card 1 for phone. So both phone and title say data card 1. That's another way it can get you in trouble. That's why I put the name of it in front of it, just in case it does that weirdness. And all I have to do is refer to the name that is a name that I would think of it as. Same thing with all of these. Normally I come through and I name all of these, but for the sake of time, I did not for this demo. Because sometimes, like this one says 11111. This one says 1, but then all the components under it say 2 for the phone. Do you see that? I don't know why it does that. It's weird. And see, look, I got another data card right here. Data card 1 right here. Sometimes when you refresh the properties. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to the form right here. The form is, again, connected to the data source, remember? So if I go to properties and I look at the data right here, this is the data source. If I click on that, it shows me all the fields that are available to me because they're all available in this list. And sometimes you just need to refresh it because you added another field in SharePoint. And then, but you have 2 screens open. You got your PowerApps over here and you got the lists over there, and you added a new field and now it's not showing up in your PowerApp. You got to refresh it so the connection refreshes and it pulls that field in. And that's where you sometimes get the issues with the data cards naming themselves weird crap that's already there. Okay, so you need to be aware of that. And again, make sure you name your stuff appropriately so hopefully you don't have any issues, but it gets everybody. Also, sometimes you have to delete, like you'll have 2 of these employee names, for example, and you have to delete one. Always delete the one that's grayed out. But then the problem is when you delete it, you have to put it back on the form and then it's not formatted. You gotta go through all the format crap again. Love PowerApps, but man, that's one of those things that I really want them to fix. All right. Really quickly, because we are seriously running out of time now. Let's look at the Canvas apps real quick. Now I'm going to go back to my SharePoint environment. Go under Site Contents. Oh, I'm still in Classic. Let me get out of Classic. Note all the names of all the, actually these down here. All the names of stuff have this. InfoPath List, PowerApps List, PowerApps List 2, InfoPath Library, Timesheet, Test, blah, blah, blah. If I go to powerapps.microsoft.com and then I click on the sign in, and if I'm signed in another tab, it'll automatically sign me in, although I might get that sign in box where I just click on whatever my user profile is, which for me, I have billions. For you, you might only have 1 or 2, hopefully. You get to this place, which is like your environment that shows you Power Apps that are here, but maybe not necessarily here. So this one, under here, you see I have employee and employee 2 info. They're not in SharePoint. The reason why they're not is because these are Canvas apps. In order to make a mobile app or a tablet app, it has to be a Canvas app. In order to make a mobile app, it has to be a Canvas app. You can't make a SharePoint list form, customized list form into a mobile app. They won't show up in the Power Apps. Now you can grab the data. So if I go from this InfoPath, employee info Canvas app, which I can't remember if this one was the tablet one or the mobile one. Come on. Okay, hopefully it comes up while I'm turning my back on it. You can pull in a data source from more places than just SharePoint. But for the Canvas apps, you can just pull in a SharePoint data source. Just note that if you need a SharePoint list or library to have a customized form as well as a mobile app, you have to create both. There's no way around it right now, which sucks, but that's reality, okay? You're gonna have to create your Canvas app as a mobile app, and you have to customize the form, okay? And it still didn't come up. Awesome. Well, we're out of time anyway, but I'm going to share a few more things with you, and then we'll be on our merry ways to lunch. Another catch-22 just came out not too long ago. Thank you, Microsoft. And that is anybody that has had free PowerApps outside of Office 365. So say you had an Office 365 subscription that didn't include PowerApps. There was a way for you to go to powerapps.microsoft.com and sign up for a free subscription that would add it into your Office 365 without you having a license. It was a free license. That free license is gone. Microsoft has removed it, and they gave everybody that had that those licenses till supposedly February, except for some people got yanked last week. So they had messages that said, you have until February. This free thing is no longer free. You got to pay $7 or you have to upgrade your Office 365 subscription. Yeah. Some of my friends got yanked last week, so they were like, nice. If you have Office 365, certain plans already have PowerApps. They have the Canvas apps, and they have the ability to connect to all of the Office 365 stuff, as well as automation of through Flow. If you need more things, like being able to access the Common Data service, you have to upgrade to this Power Plan 1, which means you got to pay the extra $7 per user. Or the $40 if you need the enterprise grade environments and policies. Now, another catch-22 that a lot of people don't realize is they think when you create a mobile app, you can just create a mobile app and people can get to it, right? Nope. They got to have a license, and they got to have a login to your environment somehow in order to get to your apps for that organization. So that's another thing. So these mobile apps are not like freestanding mobile apps. They're connected to your environment, to your tenant, to your organization. And the person has to have a license. Now you may say, but what about this free community plan? Well, you get a free license with the free community plan license, but if you read it, it says that it's only for you, free for individual use, which means you can't share it to your boss. You can't say, hey boss, can you come look at this? This is cool, right? We can do this. No, your boss is going to have to, and you're going to have to upgrade if you don't already have that subscription available in your Office 365. So that's another thing you just need to be aware of, because that'll come back and hurt. All right, so to wrap up, InfoPath, kind of like Mike Tyson, right? It was powerful, knock you out, you know. It was even lovable at times, right? You love Mike Tyson sometimes, right? Everybody did. And he's hilarious. He really is, but sometimes he's just downright scary. So InfoPath is kind of like that, you know, kind of powerful. Sometimes you love it. Sometimes you want to kill it. Sometimes you want to run from it, you know, but it was like Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson and InfoPath have had their day. Sad to say. PowerApps is like the new day. Anybody watch the wrestling? You guys, you know what I'm talking about. The new day. These are guys from wrestling. These guys are hilarious. You kind of don't want to like them, but you have no choice. They make you like them, okay? They're 3 times the fun, 3 times the power, and way more colorful, okay? Mm-hmm. Yep. But they also can make you cringe sometimes. It's the same thing with PowerApps. But like the new day, PowerApps is the new day. This is where we're going to. So kind of, you know, get over it. If you guys need help, of course, you can go to the PowerApps community, or you can reach out to me. And here is my information. And the end of these slides, I have a whole bunch more pointers. I even have a breakdown to one of the email connectors that I use in PowerApps for when I want to create a workflow that uses email notification. I break down how to use the email connector, which a lot of people have been finding helpful. And you'll have the links to the videos hopefully from today, as long as I don't destroy it, and from the other two SharePoint SharePoint conference sessions. But anyway, thank you. Have a good one.